Greetings, folks. A little bit of a late start today. A bit of a chaos day. Hello, how are you? Let's see. Start getting set up. Good to see you again. So far, so good. Some early morning online appointments, and then I had to take care of a few things around here, and here I am. Things always move a lot slower than you think they're going to. I was like, oh, I'll get this done in half an hour. No, it doesn't. It takes 45 minutes. Right, where was I from yesterday? How are you doing? So I'll go through my start of the stream pitch, watching from the tomes, Twitch TV from the tomes. If you're watching it here, if you haven't yet, go check out Fox and Board Games on YouTube for some exclusive content and the archives of all of these chats eventually. And if you're seeing this on YouTube, head over to Twitch if you'd like to join these chats real time and talk about games and gaming. foxandboardgames.com, where I'll be releasing my own game, Tales of the Hard Land, in addition to hopefully other game content for other systems and from other authors. And Fox and Board Games at Twitter and Facebook. Thanks a lot for everyone who's popped on, watches, likes, subscribes. Can't do it without you. Or I could, but it would be kind of pointless to sit here and do this without an audience or without people who are interested. And I'm really grateful for everyone who's interested. It's amazing to me. So yesterday we began looking at some story development, some NPC development for Call of Cthulhu and for my own game, a scenario for my own game. We'll probably continue on that today. This will be the last stream for 2 weeks. I will be traveling. I may do a quick pop on from abroad if I can. I have no idea how that'll work in terms of timing for American viewers. I know I've got a couple European viewers. They'll be happy. You know, if they happen to be sitting around watching me stream. It'd be kind of cool to do something from abroad. I'll see how it goes. See how absorbed I get in day to day there. But I've scheduled it as time off. If I have a pop-up stream, then perfect. Then once I come back, it's going to be a real buckling down process of getting this all really, really going. I mean, I have it going, but I'm going to really be focusing on pumping up the stream time, content, quality, and I'll hopefully be getting some more variety of content on. We'll see. As I've mentioned before, while I'm away, I don't think I'm going to do a lot of system writing. I think I'm going to, if anything, work on these couple scenarios to get them ready to start playing them when I get back online, in person. So the basic concept of this scenario in Call of Cthulhu is the investigators are all connected to, summoned by, are friends with, colleagues with famous Professor Harlow Armstrong, anthropology professor. They come into his office and he's there, and he is playing with skulls, for lack of a better word. He He has this variety of skulls, both mundane and maybe slightly uncanny from various eras, from various places around the world. He has a lot of books, or he has a few books. He was not as many as you'd think. He has monographs. He has chapbooks, as multiple suggested yesterday. It was a good idea. Monographs, chapbooks, those kinds of things. Kind of folkloric almanac sorts of books laying around. This is the era of Golden Bough, and that entire body of this scientific or pseudo-scientific anthropological archiving of folk practices from around the world. Some of it's really cringy, reading it 100 years later. I read The Golden Bough in full about 20 years ago, and it was cringy then. And now rereading it now again in parts, I'm kind of like, ooh, that's not how you really should talk about native people. But unfortunately, that was the cultural climate of the 20s, and written by mostly affluent colonizers, for lack of a better word. The attitude towards some of this is taken very, how should I put it, derisive. There's a derisive tone. Golden Bough isn't the worst of them, though. I mean, some of the content in there is really fantastic when you start talking about all of these ancient rural practices. We would call it pagan practices today, without all the New Age connotations. The practices of the country folk from both Europe and Africa and Polynesia and America. So I see him being the kind of guy that might be invested in that. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, the Golden Bough will give you like a 2% Cthulhu mythos or something, or a 1% Cthulhu mythos. He has other odd stuff in here. He has some obvious things like primitive tools, let's say archaic tools, a pipe, a stone knife, and others are far more distressed or strange, like a soapstone hand, effigy of a hand. Is it a soapstone effigy of a hand? If you've played one of my other game scenarios, there's a reference to that. Odd carved bone objects, 1 or 2 pieces of Grecian era bronze jewelry. So this is the kind of guy he is. This is the kind of fellow he is. And what will happen next, of course, is very much up to the players. I originally had a really melodramatic, sanity loss inducing scene right up front in his office. I said, you know what? I don't know if I need to do that. I'm thinking that it might be a little more subtle. I'm thinking that maybe they're going to be asked to go someplace and investigate something. And then it'll start unraveling in full from there. I think I did a pretty good sketch-up of Professor Harlow. Greetings to some of the new viewers who have just popped on. For those who might be watching this stream or watch it later and aren't familiar with the work I just referenced, it's just a wealth of information into the mind of anthropologists and anthropological studies. And I mean, now, of course, again, it's looked at with some level of Project Gutenberg has got some level of skepticism, of course, which I mean, rightfully. Project Gutenberg has it. It's the most legitimate of these sites. Gutenberg. Here it is. And here's the link here. It's to me like all these other books and anthropological texts. It's dangerous when you start looking at it as a guide to spirituality and magic, because it's definitely slanted in terms of its content and delivery, you know. But at the same time, there are these little nuggets of description of folk practices that are amazing, you know, stuff that's now lost, that, you know, from everywhere from Scandinavia and Germanic countries down through Spain and Italy to the New World, you know, to Polynesia. Not as much in terms of Africa or even Far East that I'd like, but near Asia, there's, you know, Southern Asia, there's good amount of just notations about things that were going on and what people were doing in a folk context, and it's great fodder for these kinds of games to add that little bit of detail. And it kind of goes in line with what I've said about how I design games and how I think about game development. You know, if I put in these little details or notes or side notes in the margin of a player handout and reference something in the Golden Bough, like it might never matter to the players. You know, they might never ever have any interest in this, but it adds that other just layer of detail. Like in the one game that I had set in Hungary, I specifically didn't talk about paprikash or goulash. There was another very regional dish that the player characters were served, you know, and it was something that a lot of people picked up on, like, oh, well, that's cool, you know. There's this whole other like really regional Hungarian dish that's really popular there that I think, I wonder if I still have those notes. I probably still don't have the notes for that scenario. Not on this drive, anyway. But to me, those are the kinds of things. Yeah, I don't have that all archived on my other drive. That really adds some level of realism, interest, and detail. Okay. So the next step here is obviously what do the players do from here, and what's the drive? What's the opinion of this particular scenario? So he has them in the office. He goes through this whole monologue talking about skulls and their importance and their quality and their nature. But now the players have to actually do something with it. And that's kind of the tough part. So the original intro I had after this, it was that point, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, of wow, like, okay, so this is the point where the players could very easily, if this event happens as I'm kind of envisioning it, I could totally see characters realistically just opting out and being like, no, we're good. Like, why would we ever get involved in this after this? And it's always a tough thing, right? And that's where I talked about quite a bit about the concept of buy-in and reading through various concepts, plans of buy-in. How did I get the players to buy in instead of just it's the adventure sitting in front of me, Because let's face it, I've been in those scenarios, and if that's your only motivation, crack psychology train. Whether it's I'll get to that in a minute. That's a very good point. But you like to think that players are going to play your game because they're there to play your game. But if there's no character buy-in, there's a lot less investment. And I have run into this in this game. And Down Darker Trails, that was also part of it. Like, maybe only half the player characters, and therefore only about 2/3 of the players were really invested in the scenario. Like, the others were playing it to play it, but they didn't feel particularly invested, I don't think. And it showed. By the end of the game, it showed, So, yeah, so Will says, and the players will be confused as to whether he's actually adherent to quack phrenology, trying to psychically read the skull, or caressing it like a old bony friend. Maybe all three. I mean, I think at this point, he would probably have some investment in the concepts of phrenology, even if he wasn't a 100% true believer. Now, again, we look at phrenology now, and especially as to how it was used in terms of enforcing racist stereotypes and anti-Semitic stereotypes, and all these horrible things about people who are considered mentally deficient because of a bump on their skull, or morally deficient because of the way that the crack of their skull shifted. To us now, this just sounds completely ridiculous, but I think we can look around the real world today and see a lot of people who have, especially in the past few years, bought into some really kind of crazy stuff that, if you sit back and look at it from a completely objective, logical viewpoint, it's just not real. Like, we just have no, or at least we have no evidence of it. I mean, maybe there's truth to some of these strange stories and conspiracies and all that. And I'm not saying there isn't, but there's no evidence. All the evidence is made up by somebody. And then you get in the argument, well, all data is actually made up by somebody. Yeah, I know. But there are ways to quantify whether or not the bump in his skull will be more likely to cause a person to steal, And we know that that's just not true. But I think he would definitely have some investment in it. Well, right. Exactly. And that's actually a big discussion point, not only in modern critical theory, but if you look at history, entertainment in the sense of satisfying someone emotionally or reinforcing a worldview to make them happy and keep them addicted to this flow of information, this way of thought, even if it in reality does not mean anything, you know. And you're saying, oh, you're saying language actually, yeah, absolutely. And language is really big, and that's one of the things I talk a lot about when I do delve a little bit into media studies. Like the language of things really is important, and it does make a difference. It does impose a framework of thought around a topic. Like I remember reading a description a good number of years ago now, just of an article discussing, you know, the dangers of Muslim immigration into the Western world, and the language they used, like they all stepped up to the kiosk and slashed their ID cards. You know, not they presented their ID cards. You know, that kind of language just reinforces this image of a certain type of person acting a certain way. Which, in reality, if you were there, they would be a bunch of confused people at an airport kiosk trying to figure out how to use their IDs, right? Like, that they were probably just issued for immigration. So, you know, trying to figure out how to work out this situation. Or they very casually walked up and showed their ID cards to a reader and walked through. You know, there was no slashing like in this violent kind of way. And and that's one thing that people do forget is that language does influence. Language does influence media, it does influence thought. And you know, some of the best news sources are things that are not even if the information isn't neutral, the language used is presenting it as very neutral. And it's very like, okay, this happened, this happened. Without that descriptive prose, right? Without that trying to make it a dramatic entertainment based media. And it goes in all ways too. You know, it's not just one side or the other or one viewpoint or the other. It's the way that language and media functions. And by the way, I actually do research and read and now podcasts listen to a lot of historical socio-political stuff that is really great for game material. It's really great to give a glimpse into the mindset of a game or whatever. Okay, here's the stuff. So of course here's that little bit of in the speech. Here's that little bit of weird fiction, a little bit of eldritch horror creeping in. So and again, I hesitate to do too much actual revelation of detail on these streams, but until the scenario's been played. Or is it? Right, right. No, that's true. And again, that's all being that yeah, that's to be taught too. You know, and I've really realized that. Like that has to be learned. It has to be taught. I do believe some people are more innately critically thinking than others, and it could be for any one of a number of factors. But implication carries a lot of weight. Well, and yeah, and they're ignored. So yeah, so these when you try to actually employ this a lot of times, you realize, you know, well, so I come from a visual arts background and dealing with a lot of abstract art over the years. You know, I remember one critique where somebody, either one of my colleagues, fellow students, colleagues, or one of the professors said, you know, one of us had created some really arcane, abstract, you know, BS kind of. I'm only saying that now, 20 years in the hindsight, that it's not that it wasn't good, it's not that it wasn't interesting, but there were much clearer ways to convey ideas than all this intellectual abstraction. And the whoever was giving the critique said, here's the problem. You have a room full of trained artists and art students here who didn't get anything you were trying to convey. So here's the rule. If you want to get a point across, you got to take a hammer and hit your audience over the head with it. And then you give them a few seconds and you hit them with it again. And then you give them a few more seconds and you hit them with it again. And then maybe they will actually get it. And that also carries through for RPG scenario design, right? Like we all assume, oh, my players are going to find out my riddle or my complex task or my whatever. And hey, yeah, they're going to get this, they're smart enough. I'm smarter, but they're smart enough. And of course you realize, like, without the context that's in your head, they don't get any of it, And I've been on the other end of that as a player, where I'm like, how could I not have just clearly seen that? Maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am. Or, again, it has nothing to do with smart. Getting the answers to that kind of setup isn't brains. It's context and information. And if you don't convey the information, that's what I'm struggling with right now. Like, comfortable silence. If not asked, let me ask. So, then the inevitable question is going to come up. Probably some player, maybe a player who has gotten bored with listening to the game master / NPC drone on for 10 minutes, will say, well, why are we here? Why are we actually here? Why'd you call us here? Maybe they'll be more tactful than that. Maybe they won't, depending on the player character or the player. And that's when you have to say, okay, so, and that goes to what we were just saying, like, at what point is this obscurity and obfuscation just like BS and it doesn't matter, and you have to just tell the players like what they're supposed to do and what the task is going to be for this scenario, for this adventure, this investigation. And it would be nice to try to weave this into the character concepts. Like I'm thinking vested interest in Armstrong's research. A player may be a PI who can be hired. A character, I should say. So this is how I actually really start with most of my scenarios. And we saw a little bit with the character, with the Howard Land scenario, which I'm kind of working on behind the scenes now, because I don't necessarily want to tell too much to an audience who might play it. But here's where you have to establish the buy-in. A character may have vested interest in Armstrong's research. A character may be a PI or a PI who can be hired. Be a colleague or assistant of Professor. So, this brings up the other topic. Is this a scenario that would work best if I maybe don't make characters, well, if I run this in like a convention format, like in a Roll20 online, I or even in person at a game store, or I go to a group and run it for 4 hours, I think at that point you evaluate whether or not you hand people characters. Or at least guide character creation. So yeah, there could even be some rumor the skull he has on his desk was a fellow explorer. So that's interesting. Yeah, okay. Throw that note in there. So having rumors about this guy and about his skull collection and his weird kind of obsession with the skulls, that's interesting. A Skull was an explorer he traveled with. That's an interesting idea. And yeah, there's put down a note. Seeded with rumors. Let me scroll down a little bit. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I definitely, if there's at any point that this were to be a published thing, I could definitely give you some kind of content credit. I mean, that's thanks. I will definitely. I think my biggest thought here now is, all right, we've got the buy-in, and of course, the buy-in can be established once I see what player characters are created if they create their own. I mean, this could even be, you know, um, could be a investor, right? I don't think this is going to be the kind of game where the characters have to go on an expedition. I think that this would be something a little more local and low key than that. I mean, I kind of in my head know. Be careful. Don't be so generous with your ideas. I've been burned like that before. That's why I'm really careful to not burn anybody like that. I've definitely had situations where I've seen things appear later where people would have been nice to at least credit me for ideas. But I'm really careful about not doing that. Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm the same way. Like, I even do that with kind of all my work. Like, if I put it out there publicly in some form, I plan that in to be something that will possibly appear later. But in the days when I was younger and not so experienced and more optimistic, and I've told this story on here a few times, and I won't spend a lot of time with it. I did have I was chatting with somebody online at one point in the kind of early days of the internet about some White Wolf stuff, actually. A person who I assumed was just a fellow gamer and a fan. And maybe they were. I mean, maybe somebody else read the thread and then picked it up. But about a year later, I saw some of my ideas literally in print in Vampire Dark Ages, like down to descriptive prose that I had actually used in this bulletin board in this Usenet group conversation, um, and the concepts were named exactly what I named them. I mean, this wasn't just we kind of came up with the same idea. No, this was like literally my words, and of course, who would have saved Usenet conversations, right? There was no screenshotting then. This was quite a while ago. And I went back and tried to recover it online and never was able to find it, and I was like, and again, what it could have been anything. It could have been that the person I was talking to was a dev and just decided to use it. It could have been somebody read it and then absorbed it into their subconscious later. But this was a very popular book at the time, and boy, if I'd had even just like a reference, like thanks to whatever my user handle was at that time, I would have been happy. At that time in my life, I wasn't looking for money for stuff, not as much money, or not money for game writing. I mean, again, the idea, and that was kind of my first wake up call. Like, wait, there are people. It happened again at a convention too. Stuff from a LARP game group. I found some of my ideas being used in their manual when I had discussed with one of their coordinators who I thought at that time was a pretty good friend, you know, they didn't ask me to help write it with them or work on it with them. I just saw my ideas being used in one of their games in one of their game manuals. I was like, you know, of course, then they denied it. Oh no, we were kind of just talking about it. I'm like, no, it was kind of my idea. So those are kind of my two early experiences that taught me to not be too generous with my ideas. If you have it was also the first time I think I realized, wait, you do have good ideas, and you should do something with them. Of course, it's taking, you know, many years later to the point that I'm willing to get on there and really work on it in a formal fashion. It's very different now, though. Like, you know, if you put something out on social media or you put up a website and it's all clearly dated, I mean, the idea that anyone's just gonna. But I don't know. I've heard some stories of it recently happening. Those two really famous kind of celebrity gamers that recently came under all these accusations of horrible treatment of their staff and friends and fans. And one of the things that they were accused of was effectively stealing the ideas of interns, and you know, not saying that it was. Internship is weird though, because I've been in internships and I've managed internships, and it's always a kind of a hit and miss thing. So, seeded with rumors about the professor and the skull. So, I mean, this could be the other entry point. But in fact, are to ferret out his findings. So that's another approach. It could act as a between the professor and another agent. So I think the only issue with all that is that it starts to. Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, is that the player characters are actually not working with the professor, but are working against them. Um, that could be a very different angle. It's a different type of story. I think the original vision was that the professor is, in fact, an ally and somebody they're invested in. And again, that really gets down to, you know, how I want the characters, how I want the story to be motivated. And I think I'm more inclined to still have them be working with him. Now again, as far as the buy-in goes, I generally find that if I say up front that your characters are tied to, interested in, invested in the professor's work, that you know they probably will at a point buy in and not have to be kind of forced to buy in or motivated to buy, not forced. You have to force your players to do things you're doing something wrong, unless it's Vampire, of course. Unless it's World of Darkness, then players are forced to do things all the time they don't want to do. The real the real master storyteller is the one that motivates the players in a way behind the scenes they don't even have to use the dominate power or the equivalent power of. So this is how most of my scenarios start. Is I just have like I start off with kind of this basis, and then I just generate notes. And I started doing that on another document with several other scenarios at the same time. And now I've kind of just streamlined it down to this one document for this scenario. Now if I go back and look at the notes that I did not put on this document, I have another really weird note. Now you can see me stare at my phone. I know that's fun. Oh yeah, there is that. Kind of forgot about that. A whole other layer to the scenario that I actually didn't transcribe to this document. Yeah, I mean that's the goal, right? Like we had that discussion one night on Wednesday nights that it's that this idea of control in these games is often, or agency in these games is often illusory. I mean, it shouldn't be totally illusory. It depends on the nature of the scenario. Like in D&D, it's so linear sometimes, or even Pathfinder. For many games, it's so linear, or it's more sandboxy. Like you're in this town, you have to find stuff out. So that's not anything where you have a lot of control. We saw it on our D&D game on last Wednesday where Blake was sure that we would just pick up on these hints he kept throwing to go to this one location to get to the next like kind of active adventure, but we investigated every other part of this town before we went there, of course. Like every place we stopped, there was a hint to go there, and then we were like, "Well, we'll get there." And we went to another place, and it was hilarious. And it was like no matter what he did, we just were like, "Oh, sure, no, we'll go over there," and it wasn't even intentional. But um, as far as things like this that are investigative, yeah, and in the world of darkness, a huge part of that game is getting players interested and motivated on a track that you want them to get on them without them realizing it. That's like such a huge part of these games, and it's such a weird social engineering in RPGs. So I'm hesitant to type out, what I just reread because it's really kind of the core of the scenario, and it does in fact give away a considerable amount. That's my problem with doing scenario design online, and I've said that a couple times. That like I get to a certain point, then I'm like, oh man, but if I start typing that, if anyone's going to play this, so I guess I could do this. I guess I could do this because I do have the notes somewhere else. The professor asks the investigators to read. So multiple things they could do. They could research something in a library relating to one of the skulls. Investigators to research, track down info on one of the skulls. And this could involve talking to a collector. I mean, maybe they even have to retrieve another skull for him. Yeah, and I think this is. I was watching one of the streams, Killer Bits or something like that, one day, and he was like really laying out this entire scenario, including NPC motivations, and it was really cool because it really showed his process. But my only thought was like, well, what if I ever go to play this? I mean, maybe it's the reality that the number of times you might run this throughout your life versus someone actually happened to have seen that stream and remember it. I mean, I know I joke around that I recently played. I mean, recently the past few years, played part some or all of a module that I had read years before, and I didn't remember enough of it. I didn't remember enough of it to spoil anything for myself or for anyone else. I don't know if it was one of the Warhammer settings, or the Warhammer games, or a D&D module or something, but I did not recall enough. Now again, some people have a much better detail specific memory for stuff like that. Talking to a collector. Stealing a skull from a museum? From a collection? Maybe. Do we want to go that route? Do we want to go Wilbur Whately route? Break into the Arkham Museum to steal a skull and find this cool looking book that they can take with them too? I think my players are way done with cool looking books. They are never again touching the cool looking book that I happen to just lay in front of them. It's like National Treasure, but with skulls. Yeah, exactly. It has the code to the Templar code or whatever that was. I forget the story. Templar code and encoded within the skull. Funny enough, funny enough, it is not so far off from how this is eventually going to play out, but not quite like that. Stealing a skull from a collection, talk to a collector. Yeah, so now why on earth did I misspell that word? Oh, I know, since I've been up since fairly early this morning. On a morning that I actually could have slept in. So I do like the idea of having them go to talk to somebody. And again, I don't want to resort to stereotypes of gypsy women, which is in and of itself a stereotype. tribal people. But I could have them go to somebody in like an occult shop. That'd be kind of cool to have them get to like an occult shop and have somebody there. I mean, I'm picturing Harry's occult from Philadelphia from years ago. That was a voodoo shop run by run by people from the Caribbean who were authentic practitioners of voodoo. You know, if I'd walked in there and been like, yeah, you know anything about this skull this guy wants me to investigate? They would have been like, get out. You know, they would have been like, we don't want to hear any more of this. Or if it was something they knew about, they would have been like, let me tell you what not to do. You know, let me tell you why this is a really, really bad idea. Silly modern academic. Um, so I'm picturing a scenario almost like that, but of course I want to pull out any of the ugly colonial tropes about. You know, I had one scenario where I very intentionally had really bad gypsy stereotypes in it, the Hungary scenario. And you know, I had one group of gypsies that were the stereotype of awful Rom. You know, all the horrible, but it was intentional. It was intentional because they had also been corrupted by cultists. And the explanation for their behavior wasn't that they were Rom, it's that they were cultists. And again, this game unfortunately still does have that connotations around mental illness, those connotations around cultural stereotypes, especially if you said it in the 20s, that I think are almost unavoidable. I mean, that's why I think like Lovecraft Country was so brilliant, because it inverted all those tropes. You know, it inverted all the tropes and exposed all of the racism of the time that is subtly interwoven throughout Lovecraft's work. But it just kind of ripped it off and was like, here it is. Here's how it really would have been, you know. Well, within a horror fantasy context, but I mean that's kind of what I was going for with the. Now there was also a group of Rom who were beneficial and helped the player characters, and who are these totally normal people who just happen to be Rom, you know, and have different customs. So I played with both ends of that stereotype non-stereotype, but I did it very consciously. You know, I knew, and even when I posted online about it, I got some flack. I got people saying, "Oh, you're portraying gypsies in that really horrible white way, white Western way." I'm like, no. I'm like, I get it, and trust me, it was done with the intent of subverting the stereotype. You know, it was done with the intent of exposing it as a bad stereotype versus thinking that it's reality. There's a warning about the skulls. So the skull that he wants investigated or retrieved. I also find as a game master that, and as a writer, that players really play off cues, verbal cues, and descriptive cues. And observationally, they definitely pick up on, if you put a lot of time describing something into a game, they definitely pick up on that as important versus not. I mean, but you can, of course, change that around. You can, of course, you know, play with that. So I'm thinking like, you know, if I spend a lot of time describing the skull, they're going to know or think it's very important. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So now I'm going to go and look up some descriptions of remains and bone finds. This is the fun part of being a writer for this sort of game. You know, the old joke. The FBI looks at your search history, and there's everything from, you know, the quick effects of arsenic to how to get blood stains out of a rug to, you know, what did Jeffrey Dahmer use to trepanate his victims? And then they're like, oh, he's a writer. No, it's all right. That's all he's doing. Just writing a story. He's not really doing anything strange over there. That house in the woods. Well, that's a search. All right, so here we go. This is the kind of stuff we want. Strangely elongated skulls reveal medieval Bulgarian brides were traded for politics. Okay, I mean, well, you say medieval and bride, and that's basically what you're talking about. Wait a minute. Bulgarian or Bavarian? They use the same word interchangeably. What site am I on? I'm at science.org. Oh, I see what they're saying. They were traded to Bavarians. Oh, interesting. Replaces delivering stream dialogue like tracking the natural meter of your own voice, and right before a key point, pausing halfbeat, dropping your voice pitch. But yeah, so I've really started to try playing with voice in storytelling and in game mastering, and I've definitely really tried to be much more conscious of that. And as I've said, I teach too. So teaching has really helped me in delivering information and keeping interest when delivering information. You know, making it a show. Now, let's face it, if you make it kind of a presentation and get it and use your voice to get excited and emphatic about that one piece of photographic history that you really think they should know and remember, building it up just like this, you know, that really helps to get it to the point that they're engrossed by that time. And I've been playing with that same thing. And in the Down Darker Trails game, the use of voice, especially during scenes of horror, I really started using voice and tone and lighting and all these other things. So yeah, this is a really kind of weird article. I had not heard of this one. I think this one might get a bookmark. Done. So I didn't know they did this. I actually didn't know this was done by the Huns and by Bulgarians. I mean, I knew there were parts of the world where they did the skull elongations. And these ritual deformations were the wow. I mean, it looks even creepier because my share screen is slightly compressed. Get it to a reasonable ratio. There, slightly more realistic ratio. So this practice of skull elongation, I knew it was done in some parts of the world, but I didn't realize it was being done in, at that time, would have been Eastern Europe, Russian territory. At some point would become Russian territory, but it's all plains people at that time. It's a really weird study. So I mean, there's one example of strange skull art. Somebody's web search was strange skull archaeological finds or unusual skull archaeology. Yeah, then we're gonna get into the whole are they aliens? No, no, let's not, please. I mean, I'm all about weird Fortean stuff, but no, no, the Peruvian skulls are not aliens. They're people. They were human beings. So yeah, here's a little bit more about the skulls found in Germany. That's really interesting. So ancient skeletons with alien-like heads unearthed in Croatia. Now, clearly it was the same practice. Now, this could tie into the crystal skulls, but I don't know if we need to tie this into the crystal skulls. So apparently this was popular in the Huns, the Bulgarians. Okay. Um, let's see. Well, yeah, yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, and as I just found, it's definitely prevalent. Carved human skulls found in ancient stone temple. Now we're talking. When tens of the temple also when tens of thousands of animal bones and a statue that may depict a kneeling figure holding a human head. Researchers have uncovered the remains of human skulls that were stripped of their flesh and carved with deep, straight grooves running front to back. This is what we want. It's funny because people know me in one of several territories. I think some people are a little taken aback when they realize I'm into really all this kind of weird, grisly, historical stuff. And, you know, if they've known me from one area where they see me as this very kind of vibrant, like, fun, cheery person, and they're like, oh man, he's really into those weirdly carved skulls. I mean, it shouldn't be a shock, but I have noticed there's definitely been a pitch here and there. Okay, we know about Gobekli Tepe. We know that. This is it. So this is an almost vulture-like head, or almost reptile-like head. Here we go with the lizard and snake people of Hyperborean and thus Lovecraftian and then eventually pop culture. Yeah, well, I generally look like somebody from a Susie and the Banshees concert or a black metal concert, one of the two. But yeah, no, it's funny because I've run into quite a few, especially gamers, that they're like the most normal seeming gamer out of the whole bunch, and something was out of their mouth, and you're like, you're the real serial killer here, aren't you? Forget these guys with tattoos and piercings and heavy metal shirts. You're the guy who's really the serial killer here. I do wear Hawaiian shirts on occasion too. It's rather fun. In fact, if I go to an outdoor or like a festive gathering, I show up in a Hawaiian shirt. People are just like, "Is that you? You're like a totally different person." I'm like, "Well, no, no, really. It all tracks. It all tracks." A visiting scholar said, "This is really interesting." So we can get again not only into the Lovecraftian like alternate evolutionary beings like the serpent people. And now that somehow is filtered into pop culture. Reptoids. It could be a reptoid holding a human skull. It looks more bird-like. It looks more vulture-like, and that would make a whole lot of sense, contextually. The Turkish and Armenian regions are really interesting too. When you find out just how old civilization there really is. And the fact like the original wine growing region of the world was Armenia. I mean, I guess climate wise it makes sense. some of the original brandies are from Armenia as well. So this could be a tie-in right here. We're going to pick a little note here. Holding a skull. Now, see, I think things are taking form. Let's see what else. Again, as I said, in my head, in my other set of notes. Oh, it gets even better. Mysterious skull implanted with strange metallic object. All right, let's see what. It's from the archaeologist.org. I don't know how legitimate this site is. Okay, now we're getting even. This is some Peruvian. And the Peruvians were doing some very strange things to skulls. Could be a fake. That's true. Could be for that, supposed alien implant thing. Yeah, trepanation was common. I know that. Hey, there he is. How are you? Good to see you. Haven't seen you on in a little bit. Of course, my hours have been erratic, and my hours are going to be erratic for the next 2 weeks. Then I'll be regular again. Today we're working on some Call of Cthulhu stuff. Good. Glad you're doing well. Some Call of Cthulhu stuff and looking up expectantly morbid and twisted stuff there. Scenario that I'm centering around a professor who's obsessed with skulls. So, with strange skulls. So, of course, the research leads us down the path of strange skulls. Yeah, good. Glad you're on. Yeah, it's weird. And again, the whole, and I talked about this at the beginning of the chat, and I'll talk about it again at the end. I'm going to be away for 2 more weeks. I did a lot of traveling, and then I had some personal stuff these past 3 weeks in between travel that just wrecked my time, and wrecked my schedule. But when I come back in October, early October, my plan is to really set up even longer stream schedules and vary the times. Add some additional time slots in the evenings as well, Eastern time, because I'm on Philadelphia, New York time, and then get back to it. So, yeah, things are generally working out or have worked out. I mean, the travel's cool. I'll be going to Germany in tomorrow, so there's family there, extended family there. Plus, I have some creative, personal, business stuff that I'll be dealing with while I'm there, which is good. Again, maybe I'll stream. Maybe I'll see if I can get a phone stream going from an old castle or something. Who knows? I don't think I'll be able to. So the flavor text for the Hallowed Land, I actually got through most of that, at least for the core gifts and skills. The next step was to create a really comprehensive character creation document in addition to a kind of a quick view, a quick character creation document. Some of it's in some of the older chats you can take a look at. I have highlights too. If the chat's gone, I have highlights of everything, or on YouTube. It's all archived on YouTube after my 24-hour time limit's up. And I actually sat down last Sunday and we did a character creation session for a game that I'll start when I come back. And I'm hoping once that gets rolling to either live broadcast a session or videotape and put it out there just so, or videotape, shows how old I am, to video a session and put it online so people get an idea of how the game plays, how the game actually plays, and the types of characters and stuff like that. And it was really interesting because everybody made these really political and social characters. There's not one combat character in this entire bunch. I did qualify it by saying the scenario is going to be very investigative and interactive versus combat, but I didn't expect that out of 3 players, nobody would make a character. I think one person has an unarmed combat skill or maybe an armed combat skill. And I was kind of like, oh, this is going to be so different from the last run of it where we had high magic use and swordsmen, and it's going to be a very different, almost more like a Game of Thrones political type of scenario, which is going to be interesting. So it'll be cool. But I took a little break. I started writing that scenario. I did that last week and 2 weeks ago, and I got to the point with it. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll definitely let you know when that's going on. I'd be thrilled to do that. And same, if you have stuff going on, I'll keep an eye on your stream when I get back. And then when, if you have stuff, we can cross over. But I got to the point in writing that scenario that I'm almost at this point, that if I start writing too much more on stream, it's going to give away stuff for people who want to play the game eventually. So until the game's been played a couple times, I probably won't do too much more of that live. I have been working on the scenario. And that scenario, I'll just pop over there. So this is the Call of Cthulhu scenario. This is I'm getting to that point here because I was just saying that to Blithwolf that I'm kind of getting to that same point where I'm like, yeah, if I say too much more, I've said too much. Because there's like one point that's kind of the opinion of the scenario, and if I push beyond that in terms of writing it on screen, it basically gives away the entire subplot. So let's see. So other things I just found in my research, I'll just write this down really quickly. Skull with an implant. Let's see. Let me bookmark this one too. So I go back and read it more thoroughly offline. So that's where I'm kind of at with this scenario. But the scenario I'm working on for Tales, let me pull that up. The Murder in the Bath. Right, that doesn't give anything away. That's going to be kind of, obvious. It's going to be the title of the scenario. So yes, you can expect there's been a murder in a public bath. Let me switch over to that. I think what's kind of cool about this environment, and I know streamers have talked about it, but like, yeah, there's like this group of people I now know just through these streams, and it's kind of cool. And a number of my real life friends and people I've met in real life come on, and some of my longtime gaming friends come on and chat too. But it's kind of cool that I'm kind of getting this collection of friends on here that I chat with about games, which was kind of my whole point. Chat, exchange ideas with, but through this medium, and that's what's kind of neat. So yeah, so this is the Tales scenario. This is about where I'm at with it. So my main goal is, let's see. Meet ancient chia pets, yeah. Yeah, seriously. Oh, trust me. I mean, with our regular group, it goes down some pretty dark territories and pretty twisted territories. And like I said, especially the group that I've known some of these people for almost all of my life. Blake's role who pops on being the person I've known pretty much now most of my life. And then Neil, and then, my partner comes on too. I've known her 20 years, and then Tom, who I've now known 20 years, and a colleague of mine, Bill, who we're in the classroom and we're in these faculty meetings together and we're so normal. And then flash over to our game sessions, where there's all these, lewd comments about the Minotaur charging us, whatever. Insert commentary here, and it's what you'd expect. And it's just hilarious because, I mean, we teach in an arts department, so everybody there's a weirdo, right? There's nobody that's, quote, normal in the arts, right? So they're all strange. But then, to just flash forward to, basically reverting to 13 years old during an online game. It's just pretty hilarious. That's why I was saying earlier, like people meet me in certain environments, not even work, because being an arts teacher, I can say some pretty weird stuff to my class and get away. At college, I can get away with it. But even I'm thinking like some of the music stuff I do, where it's more like folk and traditional music territories. I mean, I look like I look. I look like I look, so it's not like I'm, not like I'm hiding the fact that I'm tattooed or wear heavy metal shirts or anything. But then like when some of the people who meet me in those territories come on to something like this and they hear me talking about like, oh man, there's this figure holding a human skull in this drawing, and I'm getting so enthusiastic about it, they're a little like, all right, I wasn't expecting that. I'm like, oh, you should have. Yeah, ancient chia pets. Yeah, that's pretty weird. And again, the adornment of bones is nothing new. We have animal skulls in that we found in grave finds that have been really ornately carved. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Or make it far worse than what you ever even thought of as a game master. Like during the last Cthulhu game, I forget how the sequence went, but like something happened to an NPC. I was playing up the whole Migo alien abduction thing. But like they went completely to time travel. And I constructed this entire scenario about these people time traveling during the abductions when that wasn't the case. The Migo were doing experiments on them and then putting them back altered, as Migo do. That was like so much more involved than anything I ever thought of for this game. I was like, that's such a cool idea. Now I did do some of the time some hints about time distortion. Like they found in one of the mines. The way the scenario started is the miners uncovered what was a crypt, a resting place of serpent people, which of course weren't really dead. They were just sleeping. Um, and then I made it clear they were in the same vicinity as these dinosaur tracks that had just been found. So of course they immediately realized these creatures were prehistoric. Like even as players, even if their characters were not educated enough in some cases to know what we were talking about, like I said even the characters can make a leap that this is something really old. But yeah, then they went on this whole tangent, made this amazing tangent about all this time travel and meeting this. Then they encounter an NPC and were like, oh my god, was that the future self of so and so who got abducted? I'm like, I never even thought of that. Hey, I watch Dark, like I'm into all that kind of stuff. You haven't seen it, by the way, a German. I call it the German Stranger Things, and as you can expect, it starts out being sort of Stranger Things but then it gets infinitely darker, infinitely more complicated, infinitely more convoluted. I mean, it's a very German show. And spending a lot of time in Germany, I'm saying that from a point of reference, and listening to a lot of German music and absorbing a lot of German art. It's like this, the levels of the layers of interconnection of stuff is just like, wow, very conceptual. But they were on this whole tangent of this whole time jump and time distortion. The show is called Dark. Yeah, exactly. What if Stranger Things required a conspiracy clue or to fall? Exactly. So my one colleague and friend, she has like this entire chart about Dark. It's hilarious. She's one of the librarians at the school, and she has gone in and she's made these entire genealogies and these clue boards of Dark, and it's still not complete. Like even she's watched it twice, she's like, I still can't get it all. So, it's really like it's really cool. No one plays D&D in Dark, I don't think. But they do play Creator. I always joke around. I'm like, I like Dark is so much cooler because of the '80s thrash metal that they're playing throughout. '80s German thrash metal and alternative they're playing throughout it. Um, but it doesn't stay in the '80s. It goes all over the place. It's really, really interesting. I should watch it again because it was just like, man, talk about complicated. Talk about invested writers. Um, but I deal with a lot of German musicians, and they're all like, and they're all very philosophical too, and they're all like, That's the thing. You gotta understand. We're not gonna do it and make it simple. You know, it's like we're not gonna leave simple and well enough alone. We're gonna make it that much more complex when we're trying like if they're trying to teach me something. They're like, no, it has to be like this and then like this and it has to be like that. So it's definitely yeah, it's definitely a cool show. I mean, again, there and it was just funny because the whole scenario they'd come up with for this Call of Cthulhu game, the whole backdrop was very dark like, and it was so much more complicated than anything I thought of. I was in my mind, I'm like, this is this is so much more deathful than what I had planned for this scenario. I didn't retrofit it either. I didn't make it about time travel. That really wasn't the point. It was interesting because I know I've talked about this with some of the regulars that come on here. I found it really interesting that this group that I had played with for 2 years, up until that point, D&D mostly, a lot of them really just were like, yeah, they were like, it was hard to access. Not hard to access Cthulhu. Like, I understood the game, of course, but it was hard to wrap their minds around these ideas like winning does not necessarily mean making your character better in this game. You know, winning and progressing the game does not feel like it does in an epic fantasy game. You know, a heroic fantasy game. So it was an interesting experience. It was eye opening for me to, and by all accounts they enjoyed it and they thought it was cool. But it was a very different kind of emotional response to this game than, let's say, what happens in our D&D games, you know, where it is fantasy, it's heroic fantasy. You're not gonna get away from that. But anyway, back to this. Yeah, this is the notes that I have for the Tails scenario. The first of two. I have two Tails scenarios. This is probably the more complicated one that will run 10 to 12 hours, 3 to 6 players. There's another one that's really more like a one environment, solve the immediate problem for for up to 6 players for to last about 3 or 4 hours. That, of course, if I ever wanted to actually make my life easy, I would just write that one up first and start running it. But no, I dove into this. I dove into the Murder in the Bath, which I thought, at least for streaming, it'd be more interesting to develop. And it's what I'm planning to run first for the in-person group. And then I'll see if I can translate it to online play. It's back to this article I'm scanning over. Museum of Osteology in Oklahoma City. I mean, I guess I knew they were out there, but boy, that's a specialized academic niche. Yeah, I want to see how it plays too. And like I said, I definitely want to, even if the players are not down with a live stream, once I kind of get everybody situated with the rules and once I kind of get the environment in place, which is what I'm going to be working on while I'm away, is really nailing down the structure of the scenarios, is I'm going to, at that time, um, then say maybe 2 or 3 game sessions in, well, do you mind if I do a video recording of the session and put it out there for people to see, to play? And I don't think anybody that's playing right now is going to have an issue with that. I have a really cool owl meeting cam that Curzon donated to me at some point a while ago, and I'll set that up to give a nice in the round view. I think that'll be cool. And I think with that, I think that's where I'm going to leave this stream today. As I mentioned, is abbreviated this week, and I have another online appointment in half an hour. That's non game related, and I have a lot to do before I get ready to head out tomorrow around this time to go catch a plane. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm going to do my end of the... Yeah, have a good trip. Thank you, sir. Yeah, and absolutely. Feel free to drop in and bug me when I get back. Like I said, I'll be doing. Yeah, thanks. Good to see you guys, or good to see you people. I don't know who. I don't know who's who, and that's great. So, but definitely keep an eye on what's going on. When I come back, I am going to be doing more intensive um, streams in terms of duration, and then I'm also going to probably up my streaming schedule a little bit. So, again, from the Tomes, Twitch TV, from the Tomes. Check us out on YouTube for original content and archives of these videos. Twitch, jump on Twitch if you're watching this on YouTube, if you want to get in on some of this great live chat like we had here today and like we have been developing slowly over the last few weeks. Thanks for gifting that sub, Wolf. That's awesome. I got a couple other people who want to sub as well, who are Prime members. I'm like, well, do it now do it for the end of the week, before the end of the month. So Fox and Board Games is where you can catch up on what's going to be going on with my own game and other game publications I'm working on. September, yeah. And then Twitter and Facebook at Fox and Board Games. There's going to be more social media coming. Again, I spoke to a really good friend of mine who is a media manager and marketer, and she's going to be taking me on when I get back from the trip, and we're going to get some more social media and some more presence out there, some more stuff in order. And a big thanks to everybody who has liked, subscribed, and supports this stream and my work. Couldn't do it without you, or at least it wouldn't be as much fun doing without you. Wouldn't be worth it doing without you. I really appreciate everybody for coming on here and chatting and subscribing. It really makes the streams go. Looking forward to see you all in a couple weeks. Have a good day.